All right, cool. I guess we're live and we have entered the simulation. Excellent. So, welcome to State of Play on Mint Press News and editorial geopolitical streaming show where we attempt to laugh as the world burns. So, today we're going to be talking about Israeli information operations going into overdrive in preparation for at least a temporary ceasefire in Gaza and an insane proposed shift to attack Hezbollah. But I guess before we get into the whole France thing, they just can't admit defeat, right? Or stop fighting, just like the Western proxy effort in Ukraine. Because once it stops, they will be perceived as irreparably weak. I mean, everybody who understands the game already sees it, but it will be unavoidable for the average person when they finally do stop. So little does the average IDF fanboy know that the IDF doesn't have the juice, the umph to start fighting again once they stop. It's summertime, and most of their combat soldiers would much rather be, in their natural environment, crapping their pants in a K-hole in Ibiza during a 5-day EDM festival. So it really is much more preferable than walking into the tunnel-strewn death trap that is southern Lebanon. But we'll get to that. So, and I actually shouldn't say the world is burning, first of all. I should say the established unipolar Western order that has dominated the globe since World War II, that's in free fall. As demonstrated by the war in Ukraine, the inability and unwillingness to check Israel in its genocide in Gaza, and this insane proposed shift to isolate China by militarizing Taiwan. And this fall will end up being good for us all. After, a crazy, violent period of upheaval, which you will get to experience firsthand if you live in the West and were unlucky enough to be born as a millennial or Gen Z. I mean, we did have a few good years, though, right? We did. Like in between the release of The Mummy, starring Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz, and September 11th, 2001. And boy, those sure were the days. So, life, the universe, and everything hasn't really panned out the way we were told it was going to pan out. And it turns out that the previous generations have left one square of toilet paper left on the proverbial toilet roll, but for an entire society. So before our inevitable slide into fascism here in the U.S., let's just get it over with saying hey, Mint Press News is a independent newsroom that, has been demonetized on literally every platform. So if you're picking up what we're putting down, not just on this live stream, but the entire outlet, consider supporting us on Patreon. We know you're getting nickeled and dime in every way, in modern society because of, finance, capitalism, and all that. But, we're just glad you're here. And if you want to contribute, that's also an option. So anyways, let's continue. I think that the French elections were kind of significant in some ways. Well, in a lot of ways, I would say. I had a video of like the Philadelphia Eagles fans destroying Philly after they won the Super Bowl in 2018, and I was going to say that those were French protesters, but I forgot to upload the videos because I'm bad at technology, just an analog guy trying to make it into in a digital world. But if you're not tracking, in France, a bunch of dirty, unwashed, leftist, communist, anarchist, anti-cop, pro-eco-terrorism, non-binary, seduce your father, steal your mother TV set, rebels without a cause won a significant political victory in the French elections. And they are seen, descending into rapscallianism during a triumphal post-election celebration. So I'm if you haven't seen the reporting on it, it's actually kind of hilarious. So I think just to contextualize it, in case you're coming into this without any knowledge base about like the French elections or what it means, I'm going to play something from the slightly conservative outlet Sky News Australia, and I'll give commentary as we listen to this piece because it's hard to get through. You're welcome.
But first, let's talk about elections because there's been a couple in Europe. Both the French and the English went to the polls with some interesting results in both instances. We'll talk first about the French election, where right-wing National Rally were expected to do very well after leading at the first round. But on the weekend, it was the left's New Popular Front that won the most seats, despite the Conservatives winning more votes. Now, we'll talk about what all of that means in a moment. But first, we've got to go to a few of our lefty friends in France. Here's one French lefty explaining just how happy they are to have won more seats. Okay, first of all, just as a side note, that's not really important to this conversation. I just want to say, like, if you pronounce lefty, like in that tone, you don't actually have any leftist friends. But let's continue.
Vous avez perdu. On est trop fort à gauche. On a l'amour, on a la fête, on a la joie. Vous avez la haine. On est trop fort. On est trop fort.
And of course, here's his French colleagues celebrating love and joy.
Restez en France. Nous les boudous, nous restons ici. On reste ici. Voilà, on va rester là, les gars.
Okay, so what's happening right here is they're stoking anti-immigrant or immigrant phobia. So he's saying, Marie Le Pen's, party didn't win. We're not going to get deported. We're staying. So it's like, okay, now all these immigrants aren't going to be able to leave the country. It's typical stuff. Every time a leftist movement wins, they stoke the anti-immigrant fears again.
That, of course, was a number of immigrants who also voted in the polls, helping the left-leaning parties.
It's always the immigrant. It's always the immigrant.
This is how they displayed their joy at winning.
Personally, it looks like a banging time to me, but never blame finance capitalism. Never blame late-stage finance capitalism and the destruction of the middle class. It's immigrants. So poor people hate these poorer people. That's who you should be mad at. So it's typical legacy corporate media.
So, Liz, I know you'll help us unpack the results in a moment, but first, what is it with lefties? When they lose, they riot, and when they win, they riot.
It's called having a great time, all right?
Just how they celebrate. They're really happy. What's wrong with that? I mean, the French elections were rigged. Pure.
Okay, yes, anytime any sort of moderately progressive movement wins, it's rigged.
Pure and simple. When you look at the lead Le Pen's party had, and we already knew that they'd done very well because last month in the EU elections, remember this map. The only department Le Pen's National Rally lost in the European Union elections just last month, the only one they lost was Paris. The blue there is every single seat. That said, we reject immigration and the Islamification of our country. We want to take France back. That was, of course, what triggered the French president saying, oh, hang on a minute.
Oh, yeah. And as a side note, don't you guys know that the scariest immigrants are Islamist immigrants?
Let's just go to a snap election because obviously people aren't supporting me. I'm not getting the people's vote here. That's why we had this snap election. But remember, France has their elections a week apart, 2 of them. If you get over 50% in a seat, it's game over, Red Rover, and that seat is spoken for. In the seats that doesn't happen, anyone who gets over 12.5 is still in the running for the next round. So what?
Okay, so basically, this is not necessarily untrue. And if you're watching from France or you understand the French elections intimately because you lived there or you paid close attention, drop a comment. Let us know what you think about this. One tactic is that a lot of this media uses to kind of paint elections is getting into like pseudo statistic details, right? That the audience isn't going to actually listen to or absorb, but it establishes credibility, right? So it's kind of like when you watch a medical TV show and they use a bunch of fake medical terms and you're just like, oh, this seems real. They're saying science words. I mean, so you have the suspension of disbelief and you buy into the storyline. It's kind of along the same principles of this. The average viewer isn't going to follow what they're saying.
What did Macron's party and their cronies do? They withdrew over 200 of their own candidates because they didn't want to split the lefty vote, or basically any vote that would go to anyone but Le Pen's party. They didn't want to split that vote. So in the week between those 2 elections, they withdrew over 200 candidates, solidifying the vote, and that's how they managed to win.
Okay, yeah, cool. But that's not what rigging an election means. No one. Oh my God.
I mean, look, she still came third.
Pretty effective tactic, though, isn't it?
It
worked.
That is.
Yeah, it worked. It wasn't rigged. It was a tactic. What the hell? But you see, this is how they prime narratives and conspiracy. The only way the left can win is because of immigrants and election shenanigans.
That is Joe Bioki-Peterson level gerrymandering.
No, it's just saying.
Again, that's not gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is about voting districts.
We know this is not an election that a centrist party can win, so we're just going to pull out and let the hard right and the hard left slog it out, and the hard left ragtag bunch that they are, and I do not like these people anymore.
Yeah, we're a bunch of ragtag, unwashed, mouth-breathing, steal your mom's TV set, rebels without a cause, rapscallions. That's right.
They wouldn't win otherwise.
That's right. And so they chose the path that denied Le Pen power.
Okay, well, you're welcome. Okay, one of the things that the corporate media apparatus, which is heavily sympathetic to Zionism, is concerned about, especially with this election, is this.
Il faut faire preuve, comme nous l'avons fait dans.
Okay, so Jean-Luc Mélenchon, French politician from France Unbowed, who's considered a leftist candidate, obviously, says that one of the main campaign platforms is that Palestinian state must be recognized within days of the party getting elected or the party coming to power. And bear in mind, there's other coalitions and other parties, but this is now a force within the French parliament. And we're about to get into some more details about this in a second.
Cette élection de détermination, de volonté politique.
Okay, sorry, don't have subtitles for that one. My French died in high school. I did 2 years, and I can read a menu. So, yeah. So there's a lot to cover, right? I was asked, do you think this indicates a rise of the left in Europe? Not really. The new Popular Front does have some actually traditional leftist factions, like French Unbound, which Jean-Luc Mélenchon's from. But however, the Green Party and the Socialist Party are more like social democrats, right? Who support a gradualist reformist approach towards achieving socialism, but it's all still rooted in welfare capitalism. Therefore, more far left people within this coalition will consider them to be capitalist apologists who inevitably will betray the working class. So, in short, there's a lack of ideological coherency. I think within the alliance, which is formed to prevent the far right from claiming power. This alliance only lasts as long as the far right and Marie Le Pen and the threat that her party poses can be stopped. So that's not the strongest fabric for a lasting coalition, right? So France Unbound, for instance, is anti-NATO, yet the new Popular Front alliance as a whole has to publicly support the forever war in Ukraine because of all the social democratic factions within the alliance. Okay, so one of y'all says you live in Paris and it's pretty calm here. Was it last night? Because I'm about to play some videos from last night. So I don't know if it's just a celebration or if it's an ongoing party. So, yeah. So Ukraine because of the social democratic factions in the alliance. So the question is, who will influence who? Left movements band together, then fracture in short order generally. So I don't know. Personally, my editorial is like the revolution ain't coming yet. It's not going to spread it throughout Europe, at least not in the way that you'd want. One of my friends said today that, quote, I'm merely hoping that this will popularize critique of the capitalist neoliberalism that will coerce the masses to break away from the status quo narrative, unquote. So the main risk of this probably temporary victory for the anti-fascist world is that leftist elements will get consumed by social democratic capitalists, and then those are used as scapegoats when shit really hits the fan, right? This will legitimize the far right, and it's entirely likely that Le Pen may achieve ultimate victory. Not now, but in the future, just not yet. So there's nothing here that indicates to me a European shift to the left. Like, sure, the Tories got swept in UK election, but if you consider the British Labour Party to be anything but right-wing, especially when it comes to like foreign wars, I don't want whatever you're smoking. So it's like in America, we have a far-right party, the Republicans, and then a right party, the Democrats. So the Democrats, and there are a lot of ways you can argue that the Democratic Party in America doesn't actually exist to defeat Republicans, really. They exist to deny the left from gaining access to power for actual political change. So there you go. But, at the moment, within the global context of what we're seeing here in France is actually kind of significant. So this is what we're seeing from the last night, apparently. Now, so the far right has experienced a significant loss, yes, as we said in the French election over the weekend. And officials in both Israeli and French diplomatic corps are criticizing the conduct of Diaspora Affairs Minister Amichai Chilki during this whole catastrophe, during the French election campaign. Ever since the French President Macron called a snap election, Minister Chilki was publicly and vocally in support of Marie Le Pen and her far-right National Party, saying that Le Pen as president would be excellent for Israel, and adding that Netanyahu was of the same opinion. So, this was the Minister of Diaspora Affairs saying this. So, however, when it became clear on Sunday that an alliance of left-wing parties had been victorious, Chilki posted on X that the leader of the new Popular Front, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, was the French version of Jeremy Corbyn, quote, an Israel hater in heart and soul who refused to condemn the events of October 7th and to call Hamas a terrorist organization, unquote. As one can imagine, this conduct has damaged Franco-Israeli relations, with one Israeli official characterizing the Diaspora Affairs Minister's behavior as, quote, a diplomatic bomb. They apparently took this misstep seriously enough to prompt a response from the foreign minister, Israel Katz, that Israel does not intervene in elections in France, he said, and respects French democracy, just as we expect other countries to respect Israeli democracy. So this drama, far less scandalous, right, than other diplomatic gaffes surrounding the Israel-Gaza war, is significant nevertheless, because now this left-right drama that's happening in France, well, Israel has just unwisely inserted itself into it. So, it's significant in that the recognition of Palestinian statehood was a central promise of the new Popular Front during their campaign. That political party will now be a vocal force within the French parliament if it manages to stay united, and will further increase the socio-cultural normalization of the idea of Palestinian statehood throughout Europe. So France is significant, right? It's commonly referred to as, let me rewind the visual interest track. So France is commonly referred to as one of the big four of Western Europe, along with Italy, Germany, the UK, these being the major European powers and the only EU countries individually represented as full members of like the G7, the G8, the G20. Therefore, Israel's anxiety over losing French support is acute, and could signal a future cascade failure in unilateral European support for its military action in Gaza and southern Lebanon in the short term. And then in like the long term, unilateral support for Israeli impunity of like bullying other Arab states into compliance, doing things like, we're going to drop a bomb on an Iranian consulate in Damascus, Syria, things like that. So the support for Israeli impunity may eventually dry up. And that's what they're concerned about as well, not just in the short term, but in the long term. So, since Russia's invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February, 2002, NATO countries have presented a generally united front in terms of funding foreign wars and international sanctions. However, the unforeseen and unprecedented global backlash, right, against Israeli military violence in Gaza and the subsequent mass awakening to Israeli interference in Euro-American governments have really contributed to a great polarizing event amongst the Western voting public. The future is difficult to predict, I'd say, but this much is clear, right? The end of the era of compromise politics is here. It's over. Compromise politics are kind of done. That's what the global trend seems to be like, at least in the West. So the collective West will experience an increase in internal strife. There's not this centrist movement. It's going to be left and it's going to be right. That's kind of what we're seeing play out right now. I think these conflicts, which highlight our societal failings, our class differentials, the apparent falsehood of representative democracy, and the perpetuation of conflicts that net the average citizen absolutely nothing, are a massive deciding factor, right? So is the left on the rise? Will the United States, forever ironclad in its support of Israel, eventually be at loggerheads with European powers? Well, I mean, maybe, but I think that's the trend that's happening right now. But the thing is, like, when we look at Gaza, right, it's always been significant because a lot of people weren't political before this. On October 10th, people were still like, "What is Palestine?" And now those people are like marching in the street. So of course, these movements do take a whole lot of time, and it's going to gain momentum. But the thing that was so, at a very basic level, so socioculturally important, and Biden considered the war in Gaza as an inflection point, where history pivots and entire global dynamics shift based off this inflection point. Well, a lot of people just got real political real fast, and now not only are they questioning U.S. foreign policy when it comes to Israel, they're questioning the legacy media. And they've been now they're questioning everything the legacy media has told them. Well, what's another big thing happening right now? Russia. What actually led up to the war in Ukraine? Why are we funding it? Oh, they say we're winning. Well, they lie about they say Ukraine's winning. Well, they lie about everything else. Why wouldn't they be lying about this? And people are starting to question the entire system. People are becoming more educated. They're learning about what BRICS is. They're learning about China and U.S. relationships with China. And people are getting real educated, and because they realize that they have skin in this game. What happens directly affects them. And so what we're seeing is like a move against, these economic systems that are destroying the middle class and everything. And then you have the far right doing what the far right always does. Instead of, because the far right will protect the ruling class and its interests. And so no culture war. I mean, yes, culture war, sorry, no class war. So culture war, it's you're poor, you don't have a job, you can't make ends meet. It's the immigrants. It's the immigrants coming in this country, supported and enabled by leftist politicians who want more immigrants in here. And, they're going to get immigrants in here, dangerous immigrants, radical immigrants, Islamist immigrants, because that's the only way that they can win. It's that and rigging elections. So that's basically universal through line between all of these right movements is a xenophobic fear of immigrants, blaming immigrants for the economic problems, not the system itself. And, ever since we keep watching billions go to Ukraine and Israel, they've lost the younger generation because the younger generation is like, okay, what are we getting out of this? What is the casus belli? Why are we engaged in these conflicts? And what is this whole system that makes this okay? Just on a really basic level before we get into it. So one of the big problems is for Israel and the United States and certain European countries, because they will support Israel no matter what, at least for the foreseeable future. And this is where the fragmentation of Western cohesion and unity is going to come from. It's the Palestine problem isn't going away. Gaza was a wound before, but now it's like a gaping wound that will never heal. Probably not even in a lot of our lifetimes. And they used to be able to cover it up, right? Because Hezbollah erased the Palestine from the experience, the view of many people in the West. It was gone. So they always had this apartheid problem. It's hard to pretend you're a democracy and also in like this bastion of light and civilization in the dark lands of the Middle East when you have an apartheid occupation. So all of this Hezbollah has been mobilized over generations to build up this cultural blindness to what's happening in Palestine. Well, Gaza, everybody now knows what it is. Everybody's seen the pictures. It's not going to be reconstructed anytime soon. I think that and information that keeps making it more and more horrible keeps coming out. So it's always been this massive problem. And when October 7th happened, the IDF fell into the trap. Israel fell into the trap. They took that opportunity to try and make their apartheid problem in the South go away. And that was to make Gaza leveled and uninhabitable. But now they have this massive problem because it's a wound that won't go away. So therefore, the conversation around Palestine and Palestinian statehood won't go away. It's always going to be there, this massive crater in the earth with starving children. So Western governments do have to come to terms with the fact that there will be civil unrest, that this entire mess that is Gaza has highlighted an entire system that people are not happy with. And we're seeing that play out in France and Britain, not so, I would say not so much, but we can get into that later perhaps. And then definitely in the United States. So what are they doing? The corporate media is mobilizing the same stuff that they always do. It's immigrants. And then the only people who are against law and order are like radicalized students. And it's nothing new. It's kind of depressing. But recently, as these ceasefire deals continue to be hashed out, as the violence has the possibility of stopping, Hezbollah is kicking into overdrive. So when I was doing some research for this episode, let me show you what I found. I think this is it right here. Yep. This is what's coming up on news sites as of today. Okay, yeah. Okay, we got Israel October 7th. See the truth. You haven't seen nothing yet. You ain't seen nothing yet? Okay, let's do this. I'm just trying to watch shit about the riots in France and like, look at this. Graphic content. We're still doing this? Like, I can find you so much worse than... Okay, yeah, tank shells. Okay, yeah, got it. Why are these ads still running? Literally, this ad is from a post from riots in France from today. June 8th, or July 8th, yeah. Jesus effing Christ. No, see, the thing is, no one's saying that this isn't true. Yeah, so their entire propaganda apparatus is not growing or becoming any more sophisticated at all. And that cannot combat the rapid amount of education that millions of people have undergone in the past almost year now. Can you believe it? It's almost 9 months. So I'm going to expose you to some more conservative media because none of this is happening in a vacuum. The world is completely connected in an unprecedented way, which is why things are happening so fast. So French elections, ceasefire proposal, war in Ukraine, they're all connected. But I would like to expose you to something a little difficult if you're not aware of what this is. This is the news channel from the 700 Club, which is a daily programming featuring a mix of news and commentary, interviews, featured stories, about like Christian values and how to bring about the second coming of Christ. And it's important to watch this because a lot of Americans do watch this. So let's see what we got right now. This is what's happening in the Middle East, according to them.
Well, in other news, Israel and Hamas head back to the negotiating table to work out a deal to free more hostages. At the same time, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is holding the line on his demands to finish the war on Hamas.
Okay, so just so you know, CBN News is Christian Broadcasting Network. Hell yeah.
Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem.
Netanyahu says the plan already agreed to by Israel and supported by President Biden allows the return of hostages without jeopardizing the goals of the war. His non-negotiable principles include Israel's ability to resume the fighting, ending weapons smuggling from Egypt to Hamas, and maximizing the number of living hostages released by Hamas. In Gaza, the IDF took some foreign journalists inside Rafah, the scene of 2 months of fighting.
Hamas has been building cable tunnels. Some of those tunnels are really flat. And Hamas has built everything in a civilian neighborhood, among houses, among mosques, among the population, in order to create its terror ecosystem.
A terror ecosystem. All right, sick, dude. Oh, you're a wordsmith.
In the north, Israel's defense minister toured the border with Lebanon. He says what happens in Gaza won't affect the fight against Hezbollah.
That's insane. Okay. So if they get a ceasefire deal in Gaza, yes, they will go and shift to Lebanon. That's the plan right now.
If we reach an agreement regarding the hostages deal in the south, it does not affect what is happening here.
Gallant also says Israel won't allow the terror group to attack northern Israel on a daily basis and keep some 80,000 citizens from returning to their homes.
We're in critical days and need to use our power because at the end, our enemy is an enemy that only understands force.
Sunday, Hezbollah launched its deepest attack into Israel with some 20 rockets near the Sea of Galilee, where several were intercepted and one seriously wounded a civilian. Also this weekend, Hezbollah sponsor Iran announced a so-called moderate, Masoud Pezeshkian, beat a hardliner to become Iran's next president.
Okay, yeah, well, let's see what they have to say about Iran.
Iranian-born analyst Eli Cohen wrote on X, calling anyone in the regime a moderate means they will only moderately torture and murder the opposition.
Okay, that seems like a really unbiased, analytical, objective journalist right there, Ellie. Thanks. There are actually moderates who don't torture people in Iran. This is, again, is this completely Islamophobic, ideology that's baked into the bulk of evangelical Christianity in America. So there are people in Iran, surprisingly, that don't murder and torture people. I would say the overwhelming majority. we're moving on.
Kohanim also noted the ultimate power in Iran lies with the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Okay, and first of all, one of y'all just commented the war in Lebanon is the only reason they want a ceasefire. Otherwise, sorry, I was looking at another message. The only reason they want a ceasefire is because of Hezbollah. Otherwise, the genocide continues. Absolutely, because the IDF knows that they, on a very basic level, can't defeat Hezbollah. So anyways, we have an entire media apparatus, both in Sky News in Australia and the 700 Club, the Christian Broadcasting News Network, all playing cover, for Israel.
Well, let us hope that Khomeini is looking at these election results and coming to the conclusion that perhaps it's not in the best long-term interest of Iran to continue the battle against Israel. That's my prayer and certainly my hope. But we're looking at Hamas, we're looking at Hezbollah, both of them funded by Iran, both of them funded by other sources within the Middle East, whether it's the Muslim Brotherhood or Qatar, all these various funding sources for terror, and it's all bent on the destruction of Israel. This is a crucial time for the state of Israel.
Nothing he's saying is necessary. Well, it's not all bent on the. Nothing he's saying is completely inaccurate, but here's where it gets real spicy.
It's also a crucial time for democracies in the West to wake up to the very present threat that Hamas and Hezbollah pose, because Iran says Israel is the little Satan, but we're the big one. You and I are the great Satan. And so when they finish, they think they finish with Israel, guess who their next target is? It'll be Europe. It'll be the United States. It's time to stand with Israel.
Okay, I just wanted to point out real quick before we get into this, this idea that regional insurgencies and regional militias within the Middle East and Central Asia, the idea that they are going to defeat our ally first and then come for us is patently insane. It was exactly what the United States media apparatus was saying during the Afghan war. The U.S. occupation of Afghanistan that lasted 20 years. They were like, the Taliban, if they're not defeated in Afghanistan, they're coming for your kids, and they're going to get in their Toyota Hiluxes and launch a massive spearhead invasion across the Atlantic. This is like the same drudged up narrative again and again. There is no reason to believe that Hamas or Hezbollah has any interest in attacking U.S. In its own sovereign territory. Maybe it could come to a point where it's weapons free on U.S. security personnel that are sent to guard Gaza or secure the border crossings, which is something that's been talked about. But yes, the notion that would ever happen is patently absurd. It's not based on any sort of reality. It happened during the unfortunately titled Global War on Terror. And guess what? We stopped fighting the Taliban. The Taliban retook Afghanistan, and they're not really a problem for the United States, right? They're having conversations with the United Nations. So, which is something that we control, the United States. Anyways, we're the big Satan, though.
And say, no, you don't get to export this kind of violent ideology. This has no place in the civilized world.
Okay, but then again, the United States has killed far more people than any what we would consider an extremist group. The amount of hypocrisy is something that I want to get back to, because the old lies really aren't working anymore. It's just so patently absurd watching 2,000-pound bombs untargeted, without guidance packages, just landing wherever they want in Gaza, and say that this is what the civilized world looks like. So a lot of this fragmentation and disunity happening in the West has a lot in part to do with this massive glaring hypocrisy that we're seeing playing out in real time. And in case you guys don't know, you're freaking welcome. That was the 700 Club. Now you know what it is, and now you can watch Christian Broadcast Network whenever you want. So that's what we're seeing. So I think when it comes to like disunity, we can start like looking at like macro movements and thinking in terms of like large brushstrokes. So what happens in Europe, and I know that sometimes people reductively refer to Europe as this kind of vassal or client area of the United States, which is not, I don't think that's a helpful way to think about it, because trends in Europe, we do have like a cultural syncretism, there is a relationship, a cause and effect, and a reaction and a response to what happens in Europe and what happens in the United States. So if there's this massive left push happening in Europe, which I don't think is going to happen yet, but been wrong before, it's going to affect what happens in the United States. Just like what happens in the United States, the student protests happened, and then there was a sympathetic response to those protests happening in Europe. So it's all part of the same system of Western hegemony. And the fact that we're seeing it, some internalized conflict start, it's just endemic. It's just incredibly indicative of the way this is going to go. So it started in October, and it's just been gaining more and more and more momentum. So, yes, I know people think that Europe is definitely very much an American vassal. Yeah, but here's the problem, and here's why I don't like the analogy, because we see that there are different types of vassals, right? Israel's supposed to be a vassal of the United States, and we've seen that completely turned on its head in an insane way. It's almost like the United States and Europe is a puppet or an extension of Israeli political will. Also, we completely rely on them. So just because they are vassals throughout history, it doesn't mean that vassal kingdoms don't have any agency or an ability to affect the overlord or the controlling kingdom. So that's the only reason I don't like to use the word vassal state is because it's sometimes misunderstood as this completely one-way power dynamic where the vassal has no agency, which I don't really think it applies to Europe at all. So, yeah. So before we get into the whole Q&A part, some of the comments were really interesting, so I just wanted to bring that up. I just wanted to look at some Fox News reporting, because as the sophistication and the dissatisfaction is growing on the left, we can see the utter intellectual stagnation on the right.
Welcome back in Live Now from Fox. I'm Austin.
First of all, that guy's way too close to the camera. He has a punch me face, Sorry, I'm showing you all the conservative media today.
Westfall. Standing by still is national security analyst and retired Marine intelligence officer Hal Kempfer. As always, Hal, thanks for sticking around. We wanted to also get to an important story out of the Israel-Hamas war. You see on your screen, and I'll read a little bit of reporting from the Associated.
So basically, they talk about the invasion of the re-invasion of Khan Yunis, which was supposed to be cleared of Hamas, but they re-entered it, took a bunch of mass casualties. It hasn't been going well.
About this, the northern and central parts of Gaza, they made their way on down until they finally reached Rafah. We watched as we just waited to see what sort of operation would eventually take place in Rafah. The Rafah incursion began, and now we're moving back up north. So what could possibly be going on here? As the reporting alludes to, this very well could be a sign of some other incursion. Could this be a more extensive one? Could this be some
group? There was some thought as they moved through Khan Yunis, and of course, the last known location of Yahya Sinwar was in the tunnel complex underneath Khan Yunis. But the thought was that he had moved further south at some point, was down the Rafah area. Well, now the Israelis are pretty much through most of Rafah. They have uncovered a lot of that terrain. They have more sophisticated means by which they're going through and clearing the tunnel complex, although they've got a lot of work to do on those tunnels. It could be that he didn't move. It could be he literally could not move. He may have been stuck in those tunnels when the IDF came in, and he just had to kind of hunker down and wait it out. So he may be stuck down there, and they may have uncovered something that basically told them that this is where he is. The other thing we're also discovering is that when Israel went in there, the IDF went in there and took terrain, they also bypassed a number of neighborhoods, and so they may have looked at some of these areas and said, look, it's not worth going in there now, because if we do, we're going to end up causing.
Okay, so I just little clip of that. So it's like, so Yahya Sinwar may be hunkered down. Also, he may not. He may be in Gaza. He may be in Egypt. And this is the kind of repetitive talking points that most Americans are still like buying into and accepting. Now, the problem is, or the significant factor is that we're talking about like broad cultural shifts or like social shifts right now, is that there's when it comes to this ideology of like supporting Israel no matter what, questioning the entire questioning the system, there is in some ways kind of like the disappearance of the middle class, a disappearance of like centrism or the willingness to compromise. We're starting to see this in America. We've just seen it go on in France, and so these entrenched people on the right are just going to keep talking about the same thing. From on the political level, talking about immigrants and how they're coming in and they're going to take your jobs and they're going to promote violent extremism, nothing new, to the tactical boots on the ground level of the same thing that they've been talking about. The IDF's clearing tunnels. They've developed sophisticated means to clear the tunnels, but also they have a long way to go. And it's basically all brain rot mishmash. But the significant thing and that I wanted to talk about that we're talking about on this live stream is that there's kind of like no way to go. We've kind of passed the point of no return of like this middle ground between political parties. So what's Trump doing? He's promising like kingship and authoritarian means of like prosecuting his political enemies, and it's just about everything that we espouse to hate here in America. And then, well, what's the liberal side? Like, if you don't want this bad stuff, vote Biden no matter what, while still freezing out any progressive candidates or any dissenting voices who are challenging the system. So protesters organize and mobilize around issues. Revolutionaries organize and mobilize against systems. So we are starting to see people whereas what you had in BLM, people mobilizing against an issue, the prison industrial complex, police hunting black men, the entire criminal justice system imprisoning people of color unfairly. So that was an issue. Now, what we're starting to see right now is people organizing against systems, the entire system that we are entrenched in, because what Israel has showed us is that it's all part of the system. It sits at the intersection of the defense industrial complex, the energy sector, lobbyists, white supremacy, cops, and the prison industrial complex, and the police state, because we get their spyware technology from Israel. It comes over here. It's all part of the same system of Western hegemony and global dominance. And that's what people are starting to organize around. And that's why we see insane articles like in the Times. I actually kind of want to pull up a tab and show you here, show you what I'm talking about. The ruling class is kind of getting freaked out. And I'm going to take like 30 seconds to find this article. I should have prepped it first, but don't stop culture war Times. Oh, I can't find it. Maybe Jim, you can find it. So yeah, it's like, don't give up the culture war. Don't do class war. Do culture wars. Essentially. Yeah. Sorry, I was looking at the live stream again. But the ruling elite are definitely worried, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about here with the different the no longer the willingness to accept the centrist coalitions or to come to compromise politics. We're going to see the West, because this is a movement, it's going to take more time, start to have a lot more internal division because centrism is the status quo. And that's what's disappearing. And you're starting to see people organizing. Again, I'm going to repeat this again because this is a great way to conceptualize it. Organizing and mobilizing not against issues, but against systems. And so that's the main inflection point when Biden referred to Gaza as an inflection point. That's one of the big results or blowbacks from that inflection point. So let's start. So that was a French election. That was the Israeli status quo. They're not really making any progress. Nothing's changed on the ceasefire proposal deal. They're still putting in roadblocks that Hamas can't accept yet. Their brutality increases. And what's new? So bottom line is my personal editorial opinion is no, the left is not necessarily on the rise because of this French parliamentary outcome. So cool. Let's do Q&A. Let's see. Okay, we got 7 questions queued up. What do we got? What do you think NATO will do about the bombing of the children's hospital in Ukraine? I did hear something about this today. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. From what I understand, Russia bombed the children's hospital. Basic line, I've not been clued in on Russia-Ukraine news today. But what will NATO do about the bombing of the children's hospital in Ukraine? Nothing. There will be talking points condemning Russia and Russians' violence. This isn't the first time Russia bombed a hospital. And I will say this because we tend to think in binary terms, right? Just because the West and the way the West does foreign policy by bombing everything is bad doesn't mean other actors are necessarily good or that they do not commit war crimes. So this could have been a targeting issue. Personally, I know how targeting works. If you get a clearance for the target, the commander green lights it, the pilot clears it, and the pilot visually clears it generally. So dropping a hospital, generally not something that happens by accident. I know when under the Obama administration, when Obama authorized a strike to hit a hospital in Kunduz province in Afghanistan in 2015, that they said it was an accident, but was it really? He became known as the first Nobel Peace Prize winner to bomb another Nobel Peace Prize winner, because that was a Doctors Without Borders hospital that they bombed in Kunduz. So what will NATO do about Russian bombing hospital? Nothing. Russia's already done it. They haven't done anything. They'll just continue to use it to as atrocity propaganda to perpetuate the war and perpetuating funding an armed conflict that will not end anytime soon. So let's see. I'll be interested to see the new French government about New Caledonia and ongoing colonization there. So I don't see why. I do think if this left movement wants to recognize a Palestinian state, and they'll have to put that forward, they will have to perforce make the New Caledonia thing an issue as well. Otherwise, be blamed or accused internally of the greatest hypocrisy. So I don't see how you would rhetorically be catching a lot of international flack for talking about a Palestinian state while you're still doing shenanigans over in New Caledonia. But we'll have to wait and see on that. So let's see. Oh, okay. Okay, here we go. Bill Nye, the highest guy, greatest handle yet. Do you expect to see Z-boy terrorist attacks in the U.S. and Europe after Israel is inevitably destroyed? I don't know what their capacity for false flags is. I don't see why. I would like to think that, you know what? I have not actually considered that because it seems too crazy. And it's also like a lot of people who support like Israel in that way in the United States are like really live comfortable lives. They're pretty like we would say privileged, and that's just not what an insurgent makes. So when you lose everything, everything's taken away from you. That's when you start thinking about doing the hardcore stuff. So that I haven't thought about that. That's not even rated on my radar, but I would definitely think more about it for sure. Could there be riots in the U.S. around election? Okay, I hope so. I know the DNC is coming up. I'm not tracking. I think it's going to be a hybrid conference where a lot of it's going to be like phoned in, or you can like join a Zoom meeting or something. I did want to remind you that on the 24th of this month, Benjamin Netanyahu, because it hasn't been canceled yet publicly, is still slotted to come to Washington, D.C. and address Congress. Okay? That's so if you want to riot and that trip's not canceled, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be in New York City this month. I just learned I have to fly up there. So I will be there around that time, and I'll just take the train down to D.C. So, hey, I'm going to show up for that for sure. Around the presidential election, when the results come in, if Trump gets elected, people are going to freak out. If Biden gets elected, people are going to freak out. Yeah, riots. But in the meantime, if you don't want to wait until November, you have another opportunity on July 24th. So do you think NATO will survive the decade? What about Israel? So this is a great question, and I think I'm going to kind of end on this one because it ties everything together kind of perfectly. So when we talk about dissent within, like internal dissent within what we imagine to be the collective West, that's the transatlantic countries, North America, Europe. So there has been this thing binding everyone together. This NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Trump and the people who follow him have we're the first to get disillusioned about NATO because they're like, NATO doesn't, we're spending all this money on NATO and all these other wealthy European countries aren't pulling their own weight. We're paying for everything. So that's how they started to turn on it. And then they started to turn on it even harder over the past few years. So if Trump gets reelected, they're going to try to completely defund NATO. Other European countries are going to try to keep NATO together, and on a very basic, general, reductive level, it's going to cause a massive drama and imbalance within the system. Also, because Trump will probably support Israel no matter what, he just got that Miriam Adelson $100 million for his campaign to essentially colonize the West Bank. He's going to support Israel no matter what. Then some of the Europeans are going to stop supporting Israel no matter what. So you're going to have this tension of Trump's going to want to end the war in Ukraine. Other countries in Europe are going to want to keep it going. He's going to want to disband NATO. Other countries in Europe are going to want to keep NATO. Then he's going to support Israel no matter what. But other countries in Europe are going to be like, no, we can't really do that anymore. So there's these massive pain points that we're going to start to see really start to cause friction within these generally homogenous powers that kind of work together. So NATO surviving the decade, I don't know. Israel, I don't know. I mean, they're going to have to change some stuff if Israel wants to survive the decade. I've heard people have the opinion that, within 10 years, within 5 years, within 1 year, I don't know. It's kind of hard to see. We are in such unprecedented territory, right? Everything happens so fast. If you take a corollary to the Vietnam War, how long it took people to be educated about what was happening in Vietnam, about U.S. involvement in Vietnam. They had to spend years doing teach-ins and college campuses and community centers, all these activists, teaching the truth about the Vietnam War. That took years. What did it take to educate people about Israel in Gaza? What, a month, 2 months? I mean, people are still going to keep coming on board for years. And we have to welcome them in. But everything happens so rapidly now. And because of the transmission of information, things move faster. So the dismantling of NATO could happen a lot faster than anyone expected it, especially if Trump gets elected. What about Israel? Probably the same thing. No one thought that this could happen this quickly. So, yeah, guys, thanks for watching. I think we're going to wind down. That was a great question that kind of tied everything together. Yeah, people are going to get more radical, both left and right, and the pre-existing power structure and how the West used to work together is going to continue to be dismantled. It's been happening for 20 years. It's been happening. Like, the worst geostrategic decision ever made was to get involved in 2 low-intensity counterinsurgencies with no legal basis in the Middle East and Central Asia. And it's been following, and now it's really coming to a head. So that was the slow tipping over, starting to roll down the cliff, and now gain terminal velocity. And we're just going down. So I do think it's going to happen quicker than anybody thinks, for sure. So, yeah, hope that was educational. Thank you guys so much for watching. And I think we're going to try maybe Thursday, because our Friday engagements have been kind of crappy. So we'll keep you posted on that. We'll post on Mint Press. I'll post on my social media, and we'll figure it out. So we're going to have a meeting tomorrow, figure out if it's going to be Thursday or Friday. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you got to most of y'all's questions, and see you next time. This has been State of Play. Have a great night.